Hi, I'm Dr. John McGraw. I'm the CEO of Izotropic, and I'm here to tell you about our device, the dedicated breast CT imaging device that intends to replace mammography and tomosynthesis. We're a public company. We're on the CSE under the ticker symbol IZO, and on the OTCQB, IZOZF, and on Frankfurt on 1R3. As we are a public company, we have the typical forward-looking statements and disclaimers, which I'm sure everybody has read many times or had these, so we'll just have those for a moment. So we're going to talk about breast cancer. And breast cancer is one of the most commonly diagnosed cancers. And we are the only publicly traded company developing a dedicated breast CT imaging device for the more accurate detection of breast cancer. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is that we have a management team that has tremendous experience in medical devices with many exits in the billion-dollar range. We have great technology, which I'll show you, and a tremendous market in which it's over a $3.5 billion market just in the United States alone. And there's tremendous demand from women for this technology today. They ask me, when are you coming to market? We'd like this today. From radiologists and oncologists to clinics where they realize that they could have better diagnostic capabilities but also make more money and improve the standard of care right now. Well, let's talk about mammography. This is very much a technology that has been around for many years, and this is where a woman undergoes screening initially on a mammo machine, and then if they see something, they go for a diagnostic workup of the breast, more imaging, and then go on to further imaging or biopsy. Now, this case today is where we take a cone shape of the breast and compress it into a pancake shape. Now, this is very uncomfortable, but it's to get the best possible 2D imagery. So there's lots of issues with that. And here's the machine right here that does this. This has a tremendous amount of force, and if you go to the FDA website actually, to give you an idea of the amount of force involved, is that about 60% of the women that rupture their breast implants are due to the compression associated with mammography. So that gives you an idea. It's very uncomfortable. It also distorts the imagery. You can't see around the tissue very much. And when you're doing a diagnostic view, the woman interacts with the technologist. The technologist handles the woman's breast and does up to 12 different views for a diagnostic workup to try and identify cancer. That takes a lot of time, and there are recalls associated with that, with women not getting the right view, or there's compression and there's folds in the tissue that overlap with the area of interest. Well, subsequent to this, what we call digital tomosynthesis is that they've decided to move the emitter back and forth about 15 degrees to 50 degrees and get more of a what they call three-dimensional image, and I'll show you some imagery in a second of that. And that imagery is to give you greater definition. And Hologic and many companies have been very successful in bringing those to market, and that's now the new standard of care. Well, there's distortion associated with this in terms of, although it's a very high-quality image, you get some motion blur, and you're unable to use some standard imaging techniques like the addition of contrast to visualize tumors, because if you can imagine, you have something like an orange, and you inject orange with a dye and then you compress it, that dye goes everywhere. And contrast is used to visualize tumors because tumors typically require a lot of energy, and energy is supplied by blood, and those blood vessels are grown into the tumors, and so if you highlight all these blood vessels via contrast, you can see areas of tumor growth. The other challenge is that not all women's breasts are the same. younger women typically have greater density of breasts, or certain ethnicities have different breast densities. And so the higher the density of your breast, the less chance you're able to see a tumor, because that density and the tumor are more similar. Furthermore, if you have a dense breast, you're more likely to get cancer. So it's kind of a double whammy there. And so mammography and tomosynthesis have challenges at seeing the tumors because of that, and sensitivity drops from about 75 or 80% down to about 45% with breast density. And that changes with the stage of diagnosis. So we're developing a breast CT imaging device, and I'm going to jump right into the imagery, so then we'll back up into how we got those images. So this is the same breast, exactly the same breast, taken with 3 different technologies. Now, the one on the left is traditional mammography. The one in the middle is tomosynthesis, where they move the detector back and forth, or the emitter. And then the one in the middle is what we're building, called IsoView, a breast CT image where we take 500 images and combine them in 10 seconds. And it's typical CT imagery in terms of you can take an image, and at any X, Y, and Z plane, you can look at that in any orientation. Radiologists are very familiar with looking at these technologies. But let's just advance this a little bit and show you what we can do with this. Here, it's the same image. We take those images in 10 seconds, and we can rotate this, and you can see this imagery right here, a full 3D reconstruction of the breast. So when I show radiologists this, they're very excited about this. They can see the tumor very easily. I'm sure you can too. You can see those 2 highlighted spots. They can see what's around it. They can see the interplay between blood vessels and the different ways it grows. And there's a paper that recently came out looking at the morphology of tumors and indicating what type of tumor it is. And this is the advent of 3D imaging. I give this to oncologists, and they're very excited because now they can do appropriate volumetric analysis on these tumors. And by doing so, they can tell if they give a therapy and follow the tumor progression, they can see if that therapy is working a lot earlier. And then I gave these images to plastic surgeons. They are excited about this because women typically go through, after mastectomy, breast reconstruction. And with a plastic surgeon, they're finally able to do surgical treatment planning with the general surgeon with this, and to pick the line. And one of my previous companies I worked at, called Novadac, we had an indication for breast reconstruction post-mastectomy. And that was one of those indications was to make sure the breast had enough tissue and had enough blood supply so it was a successful surgery. So speaking to the top plastic surgeons, they're like, we really want to have this technology. So there's a great interest in getting these images. So let's discuss how we're going to get these images. Well, what we're building here is something called IsoView. We haven't come out with our final design yet, but this is a representative design, where a woman would go onto the table, put her own breast into the cup, and we'd administer the contrast, and those images would take in 10 seconds, take 500 images. So there's no force applied. The breast hangs in its natural shape. You can see all the structures around it. You can take all the views that you want, and you can visualize that tumor any way you'd like. You can see the structures without distortion, and of course you can use contrast. And this works really well with dense breasts. We're in a partnership with Johns Hopkins to develop the latest AI machine learning algorithms to reconstruct these breast images. And so we really feel like this is really the next wave. So when we look at the other modalities on the market compared to our breast CT, there's mammography, there's tomosynthesis, which we've talked about. There's ultrasound. Typically use ultrasound if after you've used tomosynthesis or mammography, you're not sure what it looks like, if it's a cyst or or a mass. And there's also MRI. MRI is 3D imaging, and there's whole body CT. Typically, women that are high risk, that have dense breasts, can go on to an MRI. The issue with MRI is that it's a $2 to $4 million device. The contrast agent called gadolinium is recently been identified as being potentially neurotoxic. And getting into an MRI in a institution is challenging. Many other services use it. And if a woman's going for a breast MRI, the whole team has to be women. Whole body CT is not as, the resolution is not as good. You're going through a lot of organ systems that preferably you didn't go through with x-rays, including the heart, the lung, aorta. And so what we're really positioning this product to be is, as good a product as imaging or better than an MRI, but more along the cost of tomosynthesis. A tomosynthesis machine will be a little higher than that. And so with regard to workflow, we think that the workflow will be a lot more streamlined. There's potentially being faster workflow than the tomosynthesis machine. And we'll have far less imagery required. So how do we we're building our 5th generation device. So what about the other 4? Well, this is, we've licensed this technology out of UC Davis, out of Dr. John Boone's laboratory. There's been 4 previous devices that they've built. And with those devices, they have had over 600 women go through this device. In fact, the imagery that you saw with the rotating breast, that was the 4th generation device at UC Davis. Over $20 million in grant funding has gone into the development of those devices, as well as at Izotropic. We've been developing our device, and we've put $10 million into it with our company. And so we really have demonstrated that this can work. It's a fantastic proof of concept, and now we're just converting that to more of a commercializable device. Now, this is a really large market that we're going into. And I'll share some of that market data at the end, but this is over a $3.5 billion market. The market is growing at 7% a year, not only in unit volume, but average selling price. So even during COVID, where mammographies had dropped 70% in some cases, unit sales continued to go up. The reason the average selling price is going up is the transition between mammography to DBT, to go from that 2-dimensional image to that 2.5-dimensional image. The price point of those units are going from $150,000 to $350,000. So that replacement cycle is indicating that the market in itself is the total amount of money being spent is increasing. We have partnerships with Johns Hopkins, with UC Davis. We have identified clinical trial sites that we're going to be running our clinical trial this year. We haven't announced those yet, but they'll be on top-tier sites. And also, we're going to have multiple revenue streams with this device. First of all, we're going to sell the equipment. The equipment will be in the capital side. We're also looking at a leasing arrangement. We also are going to be selling software on a subscription basis for specific modules. I talked about how oncologists can do the surgical treatment planning, tumor volume analysis, or the plastic surgeon can do surgical treatment planning. Not all of those on all the clinics or hospitals will want all of that at the same time. So that's why we're going to make those optional. We also are going to have accessory devices, like a biopsy device, so you can take a biopsy right after this. We'll be building those, as well as some parts that will need to be replaced regularly, the mats, the cups that the breasts go into. So we have really multiple devices. We're coming to market first under a diagnostic indication, specifically diagnostic workup of the breast in comparison to mammography, or the standard of care. Mammography without contrast, our device with contrast. From there, we will introduce our devices that I just talked about, the accessories, the biopsy device, and the software packages. But later, we'll expand into screening as well. We want to be involved in every aspect of breast cancer detection, from screening to diagnosis to biopsy, and then eventually working with therapies to identify which therapies are useful. So who's really bringing this product, this team together and this product to market? Well, I'll introduce you as myself. My background, I have a PhD in neuroscience. I started a medical device company in grad school. Our product that we developed and eventually got sold to Smith & Nephew. We got the engineering award in Canada. I spent time in management consulting, in healthcare and drug development, medical devices. Later, I was a senior executive of Canada's largest imaging provider called CML Healthcare, as well as laboratory diagnostics. That got acquired for over $1 billion. It was a public company, merged with another laboratory company. I was there for a while and then subsequently had left and joined another company, Novadac, as leading the global operations. There we got acquired by Stryker. It was another medical imaging company. As I mentioned, had breast cancer was an indication. Got acquired by Stryker for $700 million. And so I've been through a number of acquisitions and know what is required in terms of building value in a company. Our scientific founder, Dr. John Boone, has been building these devices for over 20 years. He's editor-in-chief of the key journals, Medical Physics, commissioner in setting the radiation standards. He's involved with the company on a weekly basis still, providing scientific insight. And we recently brought on Eunice Askir. Eunice is, he's been in a number of companies, including companies like Foxconn, but more recently was at a medical device company where they built a head and neck radiosurgical device, 2-ton device, completely self-shielded. Eunice has come to our company, is building a device actually much simpler than what he's built before, and provides a tremendous amount of experience, and a number of engineers are coming with him. Recently, we've also indicated that we have recently we've also moved our operations to Sacramento. We had an engineering group in Canada. We're moving that into the U.S., more in that area where a number of the key engineers are there. And our medical advisory board, we have two fantastic radiologists, Dr. Karen Lindfors, who's been in imaging for over 30 years, and really have been involved in setting the standards of screening. Dr. Shadi Shakuri, who's been a radiologist, a clinical radiologist, has been working with the previous devices and running clinical trials with those devices, and recently wrapping up a clinical trial of the 4th generation device, comparing that to MRI. She'll be leading our clinical trial for bringing this to market. Some of our scientific advisors, Dr. Martin Yaffe from University of Toronto, he actually was the founder of digital mammography, the initial technology I showed you. He has joined our advisory team. And Dr. Tao Wu, and while he was at Harvard, worked under Dan Kopans and developed full field digital mammography and with digital breast tomosynthesis. He went on to work at Hologic, helped build out that market for Hologic, taking that technology with him, and then left Hologic and has joined our advisory team. So the two key people that actually have responsible for where mammography and digital breast imaging is today have joined our advisory team because they believe that's where we are going at the next stage. That's where this technology is going. So right now we're assembling the devices. We are after that we'll get our units ready for clinical study. We are then we'll be identifying those sites and moving those sites into a clinical trial. We anticipate having about 3 sites there. We have lots of key value drivers, catalysts moving forward as we release what our final device design will look like. We'll put that together. We have a number of features that will make it very friendly for women and operators. We'll be releasing our updated imagery with that, and we'll be selecting our CRO to help us run our trial and getting our first patient in. One of the key leading sites in radiology is Aunt Minnie. It's a strange name, I'm sure, for many of you, but if you go to that site in September of this year, they awarded us the best up-and-coming new device in radiology. Just a little summary then of where the market is and how big this market is. If you look at all the cancers, breast cancer is the most amount of money is spent in breast cancer compared to all other cancers in the United States. And if you look in breast cancer, the number 2 spend of that, number 1 is therapy, number 2 is radiology or medical imaging. And with that, there's over 280,000 new cases a year, 43,000 women pass away each year because of that. But if you look one step before that in the biopsy space, over 70% of the biopsies are negative. And part of that is just but the imaging quality or what's needed is not where it needs to be to give women the information or physicians the information they need to make appropriate diagnosis. We think with our technology, with the 3D imaging, with the ability to use contrast, its rapid ease of use is something that will really speak well. And we're getting calls constantly actually asking if people can buy these devices today. So as I mentioned, it's a very large market. It's growing every year, and something that we think will be disruptive as we enter that market. As I mentioned, we're a public company on the CSE and the OTCQB. We have about 44 million shares outstanding, fully diluted about 60 million, about a $30 million market cap. And we feel that from now and to the end of the year, we have a significant amount of new information and value creation activities happening. I really thank you for your time. If you have any questions, please let me know. I can answer them here, or I'll also be outside. Yes?
Yeah, thank you. Can you discuss any patent portfolio you have on IZOView, whether it's the CT scanning or the
Sure. Sure. We have a patent portfolio, a license from UC Davis. That's our first bit of patent portfolio. That's with the actual CT scanning itself. We also have patents that are going to be in some future products, as well as some of the core technology inside. Where we can't patent, we're really just integrating, so we're buying parts off the shelf as much as possible to reduce our risk, for sure. Great. Any other questions? That's to get into the clinical trial, to start our clinical trial. The clinical trial will be about a year and a half to around a year and a half, that timeline after that, and then we have to, yeah. We do have a list of people that have been calling. We can't make any commitments because it's not authorized for sale by the FDA, but we definitely have been compiling a list, and people have been calling us for a number of reasons. They want their institution to be a part of the clinical trial, which is unusual. Usually you have to go to an institution, but we've had a number of inbound calls. Inbound calls to purchase units and inbound and patients wanting to be participating in the clinical trials as well. We haven't announced those projections, but I can speak to you offline about some of that. Yes?
What's your distribution strategy? Did you go through hospitals, or is it to partner with some key companies that already have equipment in hospitals?
Our initial distribution really is we're going to have key partners or key sales within hospitals, and then look at potentially a distribution partnership with a larger entity once we get our first couple sales in the field. Thank you.